Today on Technado, we're going to break down the iPhone announcement. We're also going to celebrate Cobol's 60th birthday and talk with Robert Rounsavall of Trapezoid about firmware security. That's all coming up on Technado, starting right now. Hello and welcome to Technado. I'm your host, Peter Van Rysdam, joined, as always, by Don Pizzette. How you doing?
Doing swell.
And Justin Dennison. Justin, how are you?
I'm doing well as well.
Fantastic. Good to have you guys
Good
here.
times,
It
good
feels like
times.
we're finally back to normal, because we were back to normal last week, but it was just Don and I still. So now got the old
that's not
crew
normal.
back together.
Back to the old normal.
It was yeah.
This
Make
is
the
the most
podcast
exciting
great
kickoff
again.
for a podcast
I
we've
tell
ever
you
had,
what,
right?
if
Remember-
that doesn't sell this upcoming episode,
One of us
I
is
don't know
gonna
what
be
is.
bleeding in a moment if we're gonna keep this going.
Remember when Justin wasn't here? It's a simpler time. Hey, we've got a lot of good stuff today. We have a ton of news. We've got updates on the Apple announcement. We've got Robert Rounsavall, who is the co-founder and president of Trapezoid. We'll be talking to him in a little bit about the topic that everyone wants to talk about, firmware. It's exciting stuff, but it is actually exciting in this case, so we'll talk to Robert in a little bit. But first, let's get to the news from this week. The big story is the release of the new iPhone, but our article is a little more focused than that. So this one over at CNN.com, new iPhones trypophobic?
Sure.
Yeah,
It's maybe
trypophobic
tripe.
design.
Yes.
God, I'm going to start this whole headline over. Hello and welcome to Techno. New iPhones, trypophobic design disturbs people with a fear of holes. And who doesn't have that? But that is because of the back of the phone, it looks like, where you've got the two cameras, or the three cameras, I guess, on the Pro model, it looks like, and those look like holes.
Yes.
But they're not holes.
I tell you what, you have summed it up. Next article.
So, I love articles that are bizarre like these that make almost no sense whatsoever. And usually it's from somebody like the Register and you just expect it. But this is from CNN where they have journalistic integrity and excellence. And so, anyhow, point is, a lot of people were talking about how the new iPhone was going to come out and it was going to have this obscene camera bump on the back that was just this huge wart stuck on it. It does. And if you go with the Pro version, it has 3 cameras on the back, which some people care about.
They say it looks like a fidget spinner.
It does kind of look like. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
They should have made it a fidget spinner.
That would be cool.
If they really focused on being the best they could be.
Yeah.
But anyhow.
Steve Jobs would have made it a fidget spinner.
He probably would have. But that's what they did. And so it's got all these cameras on it. There are 3 different focal lengths. Very exciting if you care about stuff like that. But it turns out that some people actually have a phobia. And I guess people have phobias of all sorts of things. But in this case, they have phobias, and it gets set off if you have a fear of holes. Looking at the back of this phone,
I mean, that looks like 2 sets of eyes staring at me.
Well, I'll say because I thought, well, hey, I've got the iPhone 10, and it's got 2 cameras on the back, and it's got the little light, but it's almost got a tint over the area where, and we're not gonna be able to really see that on here, but you don't really see 2 separate circles on this. On the new phone, it has a contrast with the background of the phone. So if you pick the white, if you pick the silver, there's a lot of different color options that are out this time around. It does look like 3 individual holes in there, and boy, if you've got that phobia and you're at the keynote, I mean, those are huge on stage there.
Maybe that's how they discovered it. Like 15 people just fainted that moment in the announcement.
Vomiting throughout the Cupertino. But no, so maybe it's not the phone for you in that case, or it is, because it would always be facing away from you if you had keep the holes.
All I know is this time next year, Samsung's will be out with 4 cameras.
Oh my goodness.
And if you're unsure whether you have that phobia or not, just look up the Lotus Blossom seed pod. It
That's the one.
even
that
if
they
you
test
don't have it, it still
triggers
kind
you?
of freaks me
Yeah, if
out.
you search Lotus Blossom seed pod, you should be fine with that one.
Lotus Blossom.
While you're saying that, though, I've seen some images where people have taken the phone and put the 3 camera things on the back, then 5, then 10, and then just a picture of a bubble tea, and it looks the same with all the little black dots at the bottom of the bubble tea.
Okay, so this I've got the picture on my
This is
laptop.
it.
This triggers people?
Yeah, they showed. I looked this up, and they said 16% of people find that image like disturbing.
Huh.
Which, I mean, it's not a pretty thing.
I think it's a visceral reaction because it kind of looks like an insect den. Maybe like a beehive or something.
Yeah, like the things that I'm like hitting off the top of my porch every weekend.
But it is a weird looking thing. By the way, if you have that and you're watching Technado, we're sorry. Because you just had a very visceral response.
Look away.
We're not genuinely sorry, but we are sorry.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's a real phobia.
So let's move to some hard tech news.
Let's do that. All right, let's head over to Ars Technica now. Debian 10 playing catch up with the rest of the Linux world, and that's a good thing. And why are we showing Toy Story there? Oh, because is Buster the name, the code name?
Yeah, so Debian code names are always based off of Toy Story characters.
Oh, is that right?
And it's their thing. I don't know why they do that, but they do. And so this one is Buster, Debian 10. Debian 9 is still supported right now. 10 is just coming out, which is exciting. And for many people interact with Debian on a regular basis because Canonical bases Ubuntu Linux off of Debian, but they base it off of the testing branch of Debian, so it usually has some of the latest and greatest stuff in it. They do a great job with that. Debian, on the other hand, their stable branch that gets released is significantly more behind than like Ubuntu. The benefit is it's far more stable. Right. The negative is that there's older stuff on there. So sometimes you want to install an application, it depends on some library, and you don't have the latest version of that library, which is a real problem when it's something like the CLib, and you're not allowed to update that or you break everything. So you're kind of dependent on the operating system actually updating it. So Buster is coming out, and actually, I think it is actually released at this point. So you can jump in and get the latest updates. And for at least 6 or 7 months, you'll feel like you're the latest and greatest, top of the world. But then in about 10 months, you'll start encountering libraries again that aren't the latest and greatest. So there'll still be a big push for people to run distros like Ubuntu, Fedora that have the latest and greatest. But Debian and RHEL, for example, where they're a little bit behind, are far more stable. So Debian's updates, it does include a couple of things. The standard kernel update that you expect to see, that's pretty normal. There's some visual stuff like dark mode that nobody really cares about except the media, which I guess we're the media, so I guess that makes me care about it. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, that they're rolling out is the ability to support secure boot. So Debian, because they're a little bit behind, haven't had the signed bootloader files to be able to use secure boot, so you always had to put your system into like legacy mode or disable secure boot for it. You will not have to do that with Debian 10. So if you have UEFI, laptop, desktop, or even virtual machines that are doing the virtual UEFI, you will be able to do secure boot on them. And then if you are supporting Debian in a server environment, be aware AppArmor is going to be turned on by default now, and that's true in canonical Ubuntu already. In Red Hat, you have SE Linux instead. But in Debian, you're now going to have AppArmor by default. Those are probably the two big things to keep an eye out for. AppArmor support has already been there. It's just turned on by default. That's the big difference.
I know we talked about the code names for Debian, but there's an article linked here about the Ubuntu, and I love theirs.
There is?
The Disco Dingo. Yeah. They always do like the alliteration, right, with an animal and an adjective of the same letter.
Yeah. Artsy Aardvark, or what is it?
Oh, you're talking about the Ubuntu one?
Yeah, their code names. Yeah, I love that.
By the way, if we're part of the press, do we get press passes?
No.
Oh, okay.
We have in the past, right?
We're not the mainstream media.
Oh.
We're the fringe.
I would like to think we are.
Yeah. No,
we're more like TMZ.
I think that counts.
Yeah, they get press passes.
They're famous,
and we're not.
Well, people actively hate them. I don't think.
I think people.
People have to know us.
If hate is what we're going for here, then I've been doing it wrong.
They have to get to know us.
Attainable goals. I think we can attain that.
True. We can do that. Just if we get this out to enough people. All right, our next article is over on Zdnet. Cobol turns 60. Why it will outlive us all. In the beginning, there was machine languages and assembler. Neither was easy to use, but then came Cobol and everything changed. Do you remember where you were when?
Yeah, I didn't exist. How about you guys?
No,
me either.
So Cobol is one of those legacy programming languages that is used in many, many mainframes. In fact, there are still many IBM mainframes that are out there that run Cobol today, which is what this article is talking about over on Zdnet, that if you work in the enterprise space, especially in the financial industry, many of them use mainframes that were developed on a Cobol-based system. And here we are in 2019, where nobody in their right mind would deploy a new system using Cobol. There's all sorts of new programming languages, but because it was used in such critical infrastructures, mission-critical systems, it's still around. It's still out there, and Cobol developers actually demand a pretty penny on the job market that's out there. So it's one of the few places where you don't have age discrimination and things that if anybody knows Cobol, there's opportunities out there for it. And it's not going anywhere anytime soon because so many of these sectors are still using it, and there's systems they just can't mess with. They list it in the article somewhere, some of the different places that it's in use. But for example, if you are dealing with a lot of ATMs, they're usually just front ends for a mainframe that is using Cobol. If you're on public transit, a lot of them are using control systems that are relying on Cobol and so on. Eventually, Cobol will die. It's just not going to happen anytime soon.
Not to be confused with Cobalt, the design.
Yeah, different Cobol.
Oh, I thought you were going Cobalt the element.
They actually say
or
in
that.
here.
Don't confuse it with that either.
Yeah.
Here we go. Common business oriented language is what it stands for.
Yeah, there's been updates
language.
to Cobol. They've added. I saw a Cobol release that had object oriented added to it, which is odd. I don't know Cobol. I do know that the new AWS Lambda runtimes do support Cobol as a runtime. So they're like, you can move your Cobol applications to serverless. And I was like, huh.
They could make a ton of money doing that, which I'm sure is why they did it.
Good idea.
So, yeah, it's not going anywhere.
Let's develop stuff for companies that have billions of dollars.
Yeah.
There we go.
Exactly.
It seems like a sound business model.
Yeah.
Better than the underpants gnomes, right?
Sure. Yeah, we figured out step 2.
Cobol.
Yeah, it's Cobol. Yeah, steel underwear. Cobol.
Profits.
All right, let's head over to Naked Security by Sophos for our next article. Mozilla increases browser privacy with encrypted DNS. So we've talked about stuff recently where the little thing with the with the company names going away.
Mm-hmm.
Where is this related to that?
Nope, this is different. Yep.
Okay.
So Mozilla is all over the place, and let's just take a quick poll here, real quick. Do either of you guys use Firefox?
Ish.
Do
I do it just because of some of the stuff I do. I test in Firefox.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do have it installed, so at one point I made the decision to put this on this machine.
But you don't use it as your regular browser.
No, I'm a Chrome guy.
So if we were filming this podcast 5 years ago, would either of you say yes?
Probably, yeah.
Now, I will
5.
say there was a recent time where Chrome was doing some kind of crazy stuff, and, well, we all know the memory hog that it is. It was really hard for me to track those. Mm-hmm. Mozilla's, the Firefox process was all collective. So I did use Firefox recently for a while.
I mean, for a good period of time, tools like GreaseMonkey that let you write all sorts of scripts and interact with web pages, and their support of the developer community and stuff made Firefox the browser to go to. And then they just lost their vision, and they started getting bloated, and they dropped support for some of these key things that people really loved, and people got to where they hated Firefox, so their market share started to drop. Chrome became the dominant browser, and we end up in a world today where not a lot of people run Firefox. So they're trying to find themselves, and one way they're doing that is by latching onto privacy. They're saying, look, we don't have a massive search engine behind the scenes that we have to feed data to, so let's focus on privacy since we don't care about the data anyway, and maybe people will flock to that. So they have done things to make sure that your identity is more protected while you browse the web. But one thing your web browser does on a consistent basis is DNS lookups. Every time you type in a domain name into your URL field, it's got to go out and resolve that to an IP. And it usually relies on the operating system to do that. Most operating systems do DNS lookups unencrypted, right? DNS has never been considered a secure resource. Well, the problem with unencrypted DNS lookups is anybody watching the network can see what websites you're going to. And, they can intercept at least the domain names, maybe not the full URL, but at least the domain name to figure out where you're going. And so it creates a history. And if you're in an area where you have an oppressive regime running the government, or in a workplace where they won't let you go to ESPN or somewhere like that, they'll be able to see where you're going, and that's a problem. So Mozilla is now adding in support to do their own lookups against a different DNS server than what your operating system is relying upon, and to do it encrypted with TLS. So it is a secure connection, and people won't be able to see, what your DNS message body actually is, and that'll be supported by the browser. So it's a neat feature. For most people, it's not going to make any real difference. There are some attacks that are out there, like man-in-the-middle attacks, where people reply to a DNS request prior to an actual DNS server being able to reply, that this mitigates. But it's mainly so that people monitoring the network can't tell what websites you're going to.
All right, I might start using Firefox again.
Yeah. Now,
are you watching what websites I go to?
I would make the argument that this hides the DNS lookup, but you're still going to connect to the server to get the web page, and we can figure out what server that was. So it's not a perfect thing, but it's a little step, and Mozilla is playing it up big to try and draw people back over. This and all the other stuff kind of makes it a little bit more, I don't know, practical. I mean, if you really want to hide what you're doing, you use the Tor browser.
Yeah,
that,
I'm going back
which
to
is based
Netscape.
on Firefox, right?
It is, yeah, an older version of Firefox.
Yeah.
Before they started screwing with all the scripts.
Oh, there you
Yeah, going back to Netscape Navigator.
go. Which is technically Mozilla.
Dang it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mozilla version 4
Use,
from
use your
Netscape.
AOL browser.
Moving to
You'll be
SeaMonkey.
fine.
All right. All right. Our next article is over on Zdnet. We like Zdnet recently. Metasploit team releases BlueKeep exploit. Metasploit BlueKeep module can achieve code execution and is easy to use. We've been talking about. Do we have a webinar about BlueKeep? No.
We have one that's in the works right now.
Right. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. So we're waiting for this, right?
What's been holding it up is everybody knows about BlueKeep, and there's CVEs that are posted around this exploit in Microsoft's Remote Desktop Protocol, and Microsoft has a patch out, and you need to update. But up until now, nobody has released proof of concept code or a way to actually weaponize this vulnerability and turn it into a full-blown exploit. And suddenly, out of the blue, a couple of days ago, the Metasploit team released a Metasploit module that you can load in where it actually uses the BlueKeep vulnerability to penetrate a machine. So it is an actual full-blown proof of concept. Now, what this means is two things. So one, if you're a pen tester or a cybersecurity analyst or whatever, you can now check your system and see if you can leverage BlueKeep against your own machine. So great for testing. But the other thing that it means is attackers now have a proof of concept, and somebody who didn't know how to take advantage of the RDP exploits before now has at least one vector that they can make use of. Now, in the Zdnet article, they actually do point out somewhere in here that it is not perfect. It's still a little bit buggy, and simple typos will actually cause your system to blue screen and things like that. But it's the first step in the full release of what that BlueKeep vulnerability looks like. And there's actually a few variations of BlueKeep that are coming down the line as well. That's not a part of this. So it's really just the very first release of any kind of exploit-worthy code.
And this is one of those things that I do want to highlight. I was talking to Daniel about this. It's currently as an open pull request on GitHub, so it's not fully merged into Metasploit yet. It is under active development. You can pull it down, go look at it, use it, but things are changing. Like I'm pretty sure 19 hours ago, last comment on the pull request, and there's like a checklist of things that need to happen. So just keep that in mind that it may change.
And the comment is, I make $250 a day working from home. And
would you like to buy this vitamin?
Yes.
Of course.
Boom.
Vitamins are good, right?
Yep. Delicious.
All right. Next, let's head over to the BBC, bbc.com. Netanyahu denies Politico report Israel spying on the White House. So this is obviously the further down story on the list here, because Politico originally had a report that cited a few people within the United States who said that there were efforts to spy on the White House, presumably on the White House, by Israel, based on the fact that they found some of these Stingray devices that we've talked about in the past before, how something that's used, I guess, by the FBI and people like that to basically monitor mobile traffic, device names, even intercept calls and data that's being sent over those devices. But a few were found around the White House, and they don't say why specifically, but it was believed that these were put there by the Israelis, according to the U.S. intelligence agencies. And of course, Israel is adamantly denying that at this point. So, but of course they would, even if they did.
I could see us going a few different ways, right? Now, just because we're allies doesn't mean we don't keep an eye on people. Trust but verify, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if we were spying on Israel. And so if Israel's spying on us, I think that's just politics.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
Keep your friends close, enemies
But
close.
the other thing to remember is that Israel is a hotbed of cybersecurity companies, right? Mm-hmm. There are a number of people coming out of the Israeli Defense Force and then going into the private sector and creating penetration testing companies, security tools. If you've been to Black Hat or DEF CON, you've seen just the dearth of Israeli companies that are there.
We've had a few on here.
So I wouldn't be surprised if it was an Israeli company that manufactured the Stingray, but then sold it, and maybe it sold to a few different companies before ending up on a threat actor. That would be my guess.
Do you remember the little PETA device that was meant to like capture keys just by sitting near a computer? Mm-hmm. It was like the size of a. Was that an Israeli? I think that was out of an Israeli research,
maybe.
Like a University of Tel Aviv or something like that.
Oh, it was, yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah, crazy stuff.
There have been several companies. I know we've certainly done interviews, and so when it comes to they call this attribution, right? When they see new ransomware, who do they attribute it to? And sometimes they get really lazy about it, and you'll see like North Korea issues new ransomware against Canada. And when you dig down, like, all right, how do they attribute it to North Korea? And it turns out that when you reverse engineer the code and you fire up a debugger, there's some hooks, and they're written in Korean. Well, it couldn't have been South Korea, so it must have been North Korea, and that's it, right? But
I thought it was ASCII art of Kim Jong-un. Just dances across your screen.
But hey, there's people in the U.S. that speak Korean, write code in Korean, and could have just as well created that here. So that's not good attribution. So you have to have a real way to tie it back to a country. And here they give us zero information about how they're attributing this back. So it could be as simple as they identified it as a device manufactured by an Israeli company. That's not an indicator that it was the Israeli government. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was, and honestly, I wouldn't blame them because countries spy on each other. It's what we do.
Yeah, and Netanyahu pointed out in his denial that Israel has a longstanding policy of not spying on the U.S., but they did point out a couple of cases here, which I thought was interesting at the very bottom of times that it's been proven that they have. Rafi Eitan, the Mossad agent who captured the Nazi Adolf Eichmann in 1960, was actually the handler for Jonathan Pollard, U.S. analyst who gave thousands of top-secret documents to Israel in the 80s. So, that's one of the examples. I thought that one was kind of cool. So,
well, I mean, you could say that they weren't spying on us. It was one of us.
Yeah,
that's
just Pollard.
And if you give it to me, what am I going to do?
I'm just the messenger. Don't shoot me.
And if they've got a policy that says they're not going to spy on us, I mean, they got a policy. It's written down.
Yeah, it's written down.
So this is really not an issue.
I assume that this Mossad agent was fired immediately.
Oh, I'm certain.
Started breaking policy.
This PETA device I brought is wicked old, but, compared to this, it 2015, but it was Tel Aviv University, and it was listening to electromagnetic radiation and decrypting passwords by sitting next to it.
All right, this is a good segue into our next article, which is something kind of similar to that.
Yeah, this is on your favorite site, The Register.
I know.
With still the best logo on the internet.
Is that a vulture?
It is.
Okay.
Oh, I was like, no, that's a cat.
Because
Justin.
they're picking over the corpse of legitimate news.
All right, the NetCAT is out of the bag. Intel chipset exploited to sniff SSH passwords as they're typed over the network. Cunning data snooping side channel technique is tough to exploit, Chipzilla warns. So yeah, this is kind of exactly what you were talking about.
So I got worried when I first saw this headline. I'm like, crap, I got to figure this out because I rely on SSH authentication for a ton of things. Although it does say that it is SSH when you're typing passwords, not certificate-based SSH, which is the way you're supposed to do it. So if you're using certificate-based authentication, you are golden, you're fine. But if you're using a typed password, they said they have found a way where they can actually figure out your password by monitoring the communications across the system. Now, that's a big red flag. That's a big warning, danger. But when you start digging into it, first off, they picked a great thumbnail for this article. It's a cat typing on a keyboard. So
all hackers are cats. I think that's how that works.
What's
Toonces, the driving cat?
Yeah.
Do you remember
Toonces?
Oh, yeah, he's great.
That's what it reminded me of. But what they did is they said, all right, when somebody's typing in an SSH session, it's encrypted, so you can't see what it is, right? So that's a fact. But when they type, it gets encrypted and it gets sent. And so you see when the packets come in, right? So you know when somebody's typing. You just don't know what they're typing. And if you know when they're typing and you understand somebody's natural human movements of like how long the finger takes to move from the space bar to the T key or whatever, you can measure the time between packets and figure out what they're typing based on when those packets are being sent.
Wow.
All right. Now, that sounded pretty vague to me, and I was like, well, the amount of time it takes somebody's finger to travel from one key to another is going to vary from person to person. So you have to have intimate knowledge of how this person behaves. And if you have intimate knowledge of how they behave, that means you could probably see them. In other words, you could just see their keyboard and see what they're typing. So there's that.
Or you have a set of good guesses anyway.
Yeah, and the other thing is it going to know if I'm holding the shift key or not?
Yeah.
No. So
yeah, because that's encoded in the key combination, isn't it?
I mean, they might see you press the shift key, but they would never see you let go of the shift key. That's
Right.
not something you send.
Yeah.
You don't send holding the shift key either. Yeah,
No, it's a modifier to the key, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a modifier code, so I could be holding shift control function option and typing
you
my
wouldn't
path.
know it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are all things that start to break down, but it is also completely defeated by certificate authentication, or when you're using something like a YubiKey where it blasts the whole key in one swoop, instead of the travel time. LastPass where it autofills in the password. A lot of the tools that we use already mitigate this. So while it was a great headline and an awesome thumbnail, it's what I would categorize as total BS.
Categorize?
I didn't.
Yeah.
I did that on purpose.
Yeah.
So, so it's funny. I definitely thought we were talking about the NetCAT, the tool, right? The Linux tool. It is not that, is it?
No, although you could actually find a way to leverage NetCAT in this.
Oh, yeah.
But not a part of it.
Is the difference the capital CAT?
Yes.
Okay.
So-
Well, that's not going to be confusing for Google searches.
Yeah. So anyhow, somebody wanted to get a proof of concept out and just show that they were able to do this and get their name out, and the register reported on it. But it's not something anybody needs to worry about, especially if you're using certificate authentication, and this is totally a non-issue. If you're still using password authentication, though, be aware that technologies like these will become more and more accurate over time, especially if you're somebody like us where we're on camera a lot. People do see us type and could potentially learn our habits, but the amount of effort involved is so significant that you'd really need to be specifically targeted for this.
But, Don, I can't tape my SSH keys to the bottom of my computer.
No, you can't. Yep. But you know what? You got a touch bar, so I'm sure that saves you somehow from this.
Ooh, yeah.
No, it doesn't. I wish that thing would go away. I wish it would. That's not in the new iPhone 11, is it?
Oh, yeah, it's 2 of them.
It's just touch bars on each side.
Yeah. The screen is replaced by 11 touch bars.
We have 4 pixels.
But moving forward, I'm only going to type my password with my left hand, non-dominant.
But
and
then they'll
it's going to
just-
slow it down.
They'll learn that that's
then you're
going to
get like a weird fail to ban, or you're going to have to call your bank and answer 7 questions you don't know the answers to.
Yeah, that's a fair point. All right, our next article is over on scmagazine.com. Secret Service probing breach at federal IT contractor. Don, what's going on over there?
Sorry. It's a totally inappropriate joke in my head. I can't say it on the podcast. I'll save it for later.
Write it down. Right.
This we're a different type of podcast.
I'm trying to read this headline going, what
We
did
would all be
I say?
laughing.
I'm an infectious laugher, and I just see Don
Oh,
trying to hold
no.
it together. And I'm like, oh, no, Justin, you got to hold it together.
No, I got it now.
All right. So anyhow,
All right.
Secret Service, they did some stuff, right?
Yeah, they're probing a breach. It's not the word probe, right? At the federal IT
No.
At a federal IT contractor. That's where they always seem to get us too. It's not, it's our contractors. It's the people that we hire are the ones that people go through.
It's really hard to enforce like all your policies and procedures whenever you have a multitude of different. I mean, I used to work for a federal contractor, and they were like, "You need to do these things." Did we do them quite like someone at the NSA or we were working for NOAA? NOAA did them? Probably not.
Time and time again, companies, they do everything they can to secure their network and protect their customer data as best as possible. But the reality is, the hackers have more time, more flexibility, more tools. They can get in different ways. There's various weaknesses that can pop up. And in this scenario, you've got basically the Secret Service, the U.S. government, where they have tons and tons of resources, taxpayer dollars. And even if they run out of money, they just raise the debt ceiling and they have new magic money, right? Regular companies can't do that. Even with all of those resources, they still suffer from things like having federal IT contractors leak out data. We've seen this with Booz Allen. more than once, right? I mean, Edward Snowden was a Booz Allen contractor, and he leaked tons of data out while he was there, and that just kind of continues to happen over and over again. So this is just another big kind of message out there to society that as a company, there's steps that you take to protect your data, but you have to understand all the places your data is stored and all the people have access to it to make sure that you're taking the steps to protect it and make sure that other people are taking steps to protect it as well. Really challenging with cloud security, right? Because we keep hearing about S3 buckets that are left open. And you know, I didn't grab the article, but Facebook just had another one where there was a storage bucket of some sort. I don't know if it was S3 or a different storage platform that had the phone numbers for over 400 million people with public read access. Like
it was an
anybody.
actual bucket. They had a bucket out back.
stored all these
it's
numbers.
out by the dumpster next to the AC.
If I can find that article real quick.
Somebody grab the phone number bucket. We need
And
to call
this is one of those things where sometimes it's either lazy, carelessness, or I got to get done, kind of a pressure thing. I need to access because of X, Y, or Z. I'm building a report, I'm building an application. I'll just make it public. It's read-only. No one will ever find it. That's a giant storage, right? S3 buckets sometimes have giant names. No one will ever, but there's tools that will actually start crawling and looking for those. So luckily, AWS has started defaulting to, you got to go through several steps to make them public now, but that wasn't the case probably even a year ago.
I'm skimming this article as fast as I can. It was 419 million records, 18 million in the UK, over 50 million in Vietnam, over 133 million in the US.
This is the Facebook.
It did not have a password.
And it was a database
September 4th.
That was leaked out, and it just says for more than a year it sat there exposed to the internet where anybody could query against it to pull users' phone numbers. So there you go. You know, it's just this kind of stuff happens, and if we're not staying on top of this data, you know, the attackers aren't going to give you a heads up. Not most of the time. They're not going to say, "Oh, hey, by the way, did you know this was exposed?" It's just going to sit there.
Would monitoring? I mean, I'm familiar with some monitoring technologies like this. Number one, in that article, just skimming over your shoulder, it was exposed to the internet and it didn't have a password in order to query against it. That's bad.
Yeah.
But other than that, if I'm starting to pull 419 million phone number records, shouldn't I be like, yo, something weird here? There's like query patterns or network transfer, but I guess you can be, you know, kind of shady about that and just go pick the first 100 records.
But there's tools that are designed for this, like Burp Suite. You can use that to proxy your connection to a web server and see like what of my information is being passed in the HTML or other JavaScript content. You know, what can be direct read out of a cookie that we know is being secured via TLS while it's in transit. But when it's cached on your hard drive, or if we accidentally flip over to the HTTP side of things, you know, maybe it's a non-secured element, you know, what's being transferred. And that's exactly what they found here was they were able to query against this database and just turn up millions of numbers. And it has phone number, has name, and at least the country. It doesn't look like it has anything more, although there were fields for birthday, gender, hometown, location. A lot of those weren't filled out, at least not in the records that they showed.
And that says object ID, so I immediately know something else about that database.
Yeah, that object ID is probably tied to something.
That one in particular, it looks like a Mongo database. So now I know a little bit about that behind the scenes. So maybe I start poking around some more.
Yeah.
Not good stuff.
Good times.
Knowing is a big portion of the battle.
Yeah. Well, you know, one way a lot of data gets leaked out like this is by our own employees just not taking the proper precautions. You know, things like phishing attempts and stuff are one way, but then just rushing out a product like a developer who's trying to rush something out and get it done says, oh, I'll come back and secure this later, and then they don't. So that's why it's so important that we audit, that we go back and we look and check. But another way is if our hardware gets compromised, right, Peter?
It is, and that can happen through firmware. I told you we were going to talk about firmware, and we do have Robert Rounsavall, co-founder and president of Trapezoid, coming up in just a moment. But let's take a quick break before we bring him in on the old Skype machine. So stay tuned. We got more coming up right after this with Robert Rounsavall on Technado.
Enjoying Technado? Then be sure to check out Ignite, another podcast from the Pro TV network. Ignite highlights stories of leadership as host Vicky Guy interviews a new business person each week. Learn more at itpro.tv/podcasts.
Hello and welcome back to Technado, and we're joined now for our interview by Robert Rounsavall, who's the co-founder and president of Trapezoid, Inc. How you doing, Robert?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And let's get started first with, why don't you give us a little bit of background on what Trapezoid is all about?
Sure. Trapezoid is a cybersecurity company, and we look at firmware. So we do continuous monitoring of firmware from servers, clients, network storage devices, and we help to, we're looking for bad things. We give some visibility that previously was inaccessible, we felt, and that's what we've been working on for the last several years now.
So you're the co-founder, like I said. What need is it that you saw in the market that said, hey, we've got to create something here because this is just not being served?
Right. You know, when we first got off the ground, the company was founded in 2011, and really, I'd come out of an incident response background, working on a lot of federal projects, and we were planning on using commercial off-the-shelf tools to do security monitoring for service providers, and there was this gap. And at the firmware layer, what got me thinking about firmware security in general was that I was taking some federal customers through one of our big data centers, and we were doing a lot of managed security services, and we were doing some really unique things. We were doing memory forensics and full packet capture for our cloud infrastructure customers, and this is 10 years ago now. And they said, you know, Robert, this is all really great, but what happens if you buy equipment and it comes and it lands at your facility and it's already compromised? And I just had, it didn't have any good answer for that. So back then, the only thing you could do were two things. One is buy equipment that is manufactured somewhere hopefully more friendly to our federal customers. And two, anything that landed on our docks, we would flash the firmware of every system from the known good from the OEM. So our first cloud platform was HP, so we download, check all the checksums for everything, and flash everything we could on the platform from BIOS to RAID card to network as part of the provisioning process. And then that's really all we could do. And eventually, when we were getting off the ground, we saw an opportunity to develop something. And really, we just wanted visibility into the firmware. You have visibility at the network layer with packet capture, with memory and memory forensics tools, but there was really nothing like a NetWitness or anything like that, one of those, or Wireshark for firmware, and that's kind of what we were trying to do at the start.
No, I'm curious because, for years, people have talked about some of the different types of hardware attacks that are out there. And I'm trying to remember when, probably as many as 15 or even 20 years ago, I had read about where people were creating malicious firmware images that you could flash onto the BIOS of a motherboard. And then, the super danger there was no matter what you did to the operating system, you can replace the hard drive and the machine is still compromised. So there was this risk. But in all these years, I've never actually encountered it myself, and not out in the field. I've never encountered a machine where that hardware is compromised. Now, I didn't work for a super secret agency or somebody that was a great target, so maybe that's a part of it. But do you find that this is actually a very common attack vector, or is it just more important to guarantee that attack vector is not there? Like, which kind of angle does that go?
Well, no, and you raise a great point. As we were getting off the ground, people said, well, this is just, I'm not a government agency, I'm not a target, so I don't have to worry about this. But attacks are starting to become more mainstream, and you're seeing them out there in the wild. Kind of the first I kind of classify firmware issues in three areas. One is stuff you find in the wild. Another one is the kind of the government disclosure. So there was, disclosure of NSA documents that had firmware capabilities. And then the third area is in the research community. There's been a lot of great talks at Black Hat, DEF CON, and a lot of really good research around firmware. So we kind of classified things in those three buckets. For a quick timeline, the earliest things people kind of are familiar with is the Chernobyl virus back in '99 that impacted BIOS, and they said it did like $200 million in damage, and you had to reflash the BIOS or physically get in there and do something. And then moving forward, I guess in 2010 there were some Dell system boards that were shipped that actually had malicious code on the replacement system board. So they didn't come directly from Dell; they came from one of their partner suppliers for a replacement system board for some of their PowerEdge servers. And then I guess most recently in the wild, there was just the team over at ESET has found some UEFI rootkits in the wild. And so you're starting to see it in networking equipment, some cameras and things like that. But the capabilities are getting there just because there's so much more code on the boards nowadays.
Now, you mentioned capabilities. So let's say that I'm a malicious actor and I want to I want to basically compromise the system. So I have access to write that firmware. What are some of the things that I would try and do? Like, is this key logging? Is this leaking private keys? What is it, or is it really anything?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've kind of seen is, when you think of firmware, a lot of the attacks have kind of been a persistence mechanism or just a point of entry. So you might not see this, there's this great remote access Trojan with all these capabilities, but you'll see some type of exploit or compromise that might allow a foothold or some persistence in the case that hard drives get swapped out or formatted or things like that.
So I'm sitting here, we've been talking about servers and things of that nature. Has this kind of uptick in all these connected devices, IoT, has that made this more of a threat just because I have all these embedded devices with, chips, good? Is that something that you're aware of or is a big issue, or you're just like, we're good?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. A couple years ago, like I said, we talked to people and they kind of would think it wasn't an issue. And with all the embedded devices where you're pretty much, all there is firmware. So you've seen that kind of raise awareness and just get the word out a little more and bring it up as an issue. So yes, the embedded devices, there was just the story came out about the Hikvision cameras recently, and there's been a number of things where attacks on firmware have been used to launch DDoS attacks, for example. But it's not like a traditional persistence mechanism like you'd see on a server platform, but it's where there's this code running on some small device, and it has become, one of the reasons it's an issue is because when you think of a server platform and the cost and the technology that's going in there, they're doing more, the manufacturers and OEMs are putting more capabilities to gain some type of security artifacts in there because there's a higher cost. And in these small connected devices, there's so much pressure to keep the cost down that, do we add in some security capabilities? A lot of times it can be a cost issue.
We're talking with Robert Rounsavall of Trapezoid, and Robert, I'm curious kind of where you guys fit in the life cycle of a project. Like, do government agencies or companies call you and say, "Hey, we've got all this equipment, we want you to check out the firmware here," or do OEMs call you and say, "Hey, we've just created this new product, we want you to check out the firmware before we ship this out," or both? How's that happen?
Yeah, so we work with OEMs and customers in different ways, and kind of the conversations we've had with OEMs in the past is hey guys, you have put out documentation or data saying that you're doing something. What kind of artifacts can you provide us to show that you're doing some type of firmware firmware protection or secure boot or something. So with an OEM, we will take into consideration, with an OEM, we will figure out what they're providing, what they're doing in the space, and then we will a lot of times take those artifacts, whether it be measured boot or whether it be some type of other artifacts, and typically we're looking for 4 things. We're looking for changes in the hardware. So if there's a new piece of hardware that's been put on that system, there's been physical access, that could be an indicator of compromise. We're looking at the software or firmware and what kind of forensic data can we get that that firmware is what it says it is. Then we're looking at the configuration. So a lot of times when you hear about these attacks in the smaller devices, it's either a misconfiguration or a hard-coded password that allows attackers to get in and do what they want. And then the final thing we look at are the operational metrics, so where we can gather things like operating temperature on a consistent basis, or bandwidth or power consumption. So we collect that type of data too to look for changes that might need further investigation.
And one of the big news stories at the end of last year was the Supermicro systems, where it was reported, I guess we're somewhat in unsure waters right now, where nobody knows if the story was true or not, that there were Supermicro server motherboards going out with an embedded chip on them that they weren't, or at least to my knowledge, they weren't modifying the firmware of the BIOS chip or UEFI or anything like that, but it was an actual completely separate system on a chip, basically, that was stuck onto the system.
Right.
Are you able to detect things like that? I guess maybe that would fall under the operational metrics.
We're a security company. Of course, we can detect all of those. It's a tough problem. So for the physical implants, I mentioned hardware, software, configuration, and metrics. But there's some interesting research going on right now. Actually, close to you guys at the University of Florida, they have a hardware security research lab, and there's a couple of projects there around one super high density imaging, where they're either X-raying or looking at these system boards, and then making it so that they're taking those images, building a bill of materials, and then making it so that a user in the field can photograph it with an off-the-shelf camera, and it can detect modifications to hardware. So there's some interesting work going around the imaging side. There's also some work going on around the power detection. So they're also doing some work running a current through the JTAG system on a board and basically developing a signature that they can tell if something's been physically modified. So it's a tough problem. There's a lot of research going on right there. And I was just yesterday, NIST just had a kickoff for their supply chain security project they're doing, their first public kickoff, and there was a lot of discussion about not only the firmware and the artifacts, but also the physical tampering and how you can detect that. So I'd love to say yes, we detect everything, but it's just it's a tough problem. We're hoping to pull in some of those projects and some of that research, but along the lines of the Supermicro, I think right after that came out, there's been some researchers that have actually done proof of concepts where they've proved that you can in fact implant some system on a chip or other things to modify it so you can establish some persistence mechanism.
Now, you mentioned like the Dell replacement boards coming in, and with the Supermicro story, the idea there was that people were buying the boards and they were coming in already pre-modded. Right. I say pre-modded, it sounds like I hacked PlayStation or something, but I guess it's kind of the same idea.
It's got Game Sharks on them. That's the problem. They were trying to use cheat codes.
So you might be able to establish that a company is completely safe at the onset. You come in, your team, you evaluate the hardware or the artifacts that they provide you with, and you show everything certified and clean. but then that only lasts until the next piece of hardware changes, the next time somebody gets access. So do you do long-term engagements with organizations to make sure their hardware stays safe, or is there some way you're able to continuously monitor that?
Well, the platform we built, it is a continuous monitoring platform, so it's checking on an ongoing basis for those changes. The whole supply chain thing is really an interesting problem, and we're looking at how we can engage with different folks to, ideally you want. When I talk about connecting with a device, we want as secure as possible, as out of band as possible, and as far up the supply chain as possible. So it really depends on the different OEMs and what they're doing. So and what type of systems they're building and for who. So if they're building systems for the classified use in the federal government, there might be a higher tolerance for increased cost to add additional security checks up the supply chain and whatnot.
All right,
and then
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I always love that game. Some of our listeners might recognize that we've talked about firmware before recently. We talked with Terry Dunlap from Refirm Labs, and in that one we were talking a little bit about some cameras they had discovered to have backdoors in the firmware and that kind of thing. Now, are you guys competitors with them? Is it a complementary product? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, the Terry and that crew, they're really great team. We're not competitive. What we're doing is we're kind of hooking into platforms for an ongoing monitoring. They're doing a lot of really great reverse engineering and firmware analysis that is that's kind of outside the scope of where we're focused. But they're a great team. I know they developed the tool BinWalk that allows you to do some analysis on firmware.
Very nice. All right, so for those who have listened to this and said, wow, I never even thought about my firmware, and they want to find out a little bit more, what's the best way for them to find out more about Trapezoid?
Sure. You can just go to trapezoid.com, or you can find us there, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Robert Rounsavall, and I'd be happy to chat with you.
Sounds good. And if you're looking for the spelling of that name, we have it in the description of this podcast, so don't worry, because it took me a second as well. Hey, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time with us today, and hopefully we can talk again in the future.
Hey, thank you so much, guys. Really glad to be here.
All right, and thank you all for watching, but stay tuned because we have more Technado. It's coming up right after this.
Are you a career changer or a budding tech pro who's looking to start their career in IT? I'm Wes Bryan, and along with my fellow IT Pro TV edutainer Cherokee Boos, we've just shot a new show just for you. Each week, we'll dive into topics to help you launch your career in tech. Watch how to get started in IT on YouTube now. Just head to youtube.com/ITProTV to watch, and look for new episodes every Saturday at 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time.
All right, thank you to Robert for joining us, and that was cool. It's like we said, our second company we talked to about firmware, and I didn't realize honestly that there was so much going on there. But I mean, it makes sense. There's something that's hard coded on your machine that you can't really change. So that could be a big area.
If you're like a 5-person dentist office or whatever, is probably a little outside of what you need to worry about.
Sure.
But if you're working for like a government agency with top secret data, you absolutely need to be concerned about that.
Yeah, you can't just assume that new server you got, you can just slide it right in the rack and plug it in. That's
and especially if you're working for the U.S. government and you're running all computers made in China, which most of them
Good
are.
luck finding one here. Are Dells actually made in China?
I don't even think they're assembled.
So there's a lot.
They're made in China, assembled in Mexico.
So much of the electronics.
Because Dell stuff is made by Unisys, isn't it? Do they make their own stuff?
I don't know.
I get all confused.
I don't know. I like how we just went, whee!
Yeah. I'm confused.
Let me look at
but
the logistics.
The point is you don't know, even if it's an American company.
Right.
I mean, get with their logistics director to see.
Well, even if it's made here, that they might be buying a graphics card from X company,
or it's intercepted during transit.
That's true.
Looks like Dell has plants in Penang, Malaysia,
Sure.
in Xiamen, China.
Oh, there's a great coffee shop there.
And So there you go.
Love that place. All right, cool. Well, hey, before we let you guys go, I want to let you know about a couple things coming up. First of all, we've got some webinars to get to. We just had one that we just filmed on MSPs and ransomware, but our next one coming up is on the post-compromise tools brought to you by the Target, Living Off the Land, and that's with Daniel and Don on Thursday, September 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and I know the whole marketing team, we were like, what is this title? We got to come up with a catchier title. And then we realized those words mean things.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that.
Yep.
What does that mean?
Post-compromise means you've hacked into a system.
Okay.
So now what do you do once you're in? And then you've got like living off the land. That means you've got to establish persistence, but you can't install anything. If you install something, you're going to leave a footprint, right? So living off the land means you got to use tools that are already installed, the software that's already there to establish persistence and keep yourself in there. So all of that's kind of a part of it. These are typically like fileless hacks. So the file system might be read-only, so you can't even write to the file system. There might be tools installed like antivirus that you have to bypass. There's a lot of different activities that go on, so it's all a part of that process.
So this would be a webinar that you want to go to if you're a pen tester and kind of or interested in that, or even
or you're trying to protect
your network.
you're trying to protect against it. And
say, hey, what tools do I already have
like
on
they
here
have
that someone
here.
could use against me if they got in?
Yep.
Right. And it's like that. You ever see the movie The Equalizer? Mm-hmm. So you got to think, if Denzel Washington walks into the room right now, what in this room could he kill me with?
Yeah.
And then you got to get rid of that stuff.
That's why I always make sure I pick up the axes and the guns right next to my door.
Well, but from that movie, I think we all learned that a camera lens, a ashtray, like
those heavy glass ashtrays, those are
Living off the land has nothing to do with
eating trees,
camping or Bear Grylls or anything like that.
I mean, technically.
Not here. We were saying we should. Oh, he missed an opportunity to call this. We could say like living off the land, and we could do it. And then we're like, no, that actually means something. I looked it up, and it says something.
Oh, I mean, he wanted to do it like Naked and Afraid, where he wasn't wearing clothes and bugs were biting him through the whole thing.
And he ate some bad figs.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you want to check out that webinar or any of our past webinars, head over to itpro.tv/webinars, where you can find that full list of upcoming as well as on-demand webinars. You can go back and learn all of those great things. Also want to let you know about an offer from IT Pro TV at go.itpro.tv/Technado. We've got a 30% off coupon code there for the lifetime of your account, so you can get a 7-day free trial, sign up, check it out, then use that coupon code at checkout and have that price locked in for the lifetime there. We also have some information about business plans. You can request a demo for your team and learn all about the cool features we have for managing teams within IT Pro TV. That's over at go.itpro.tv/Technado. All right, gentlemen, we survived with all this new fancy equipment, got all these fancy wipes and things going on the video side.
Our survivability score has increased from 6.7 to 6.9.
Yeah, and I learned how to make a fire with only a rubber band. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone, and we will be back next week for an all-new Technado right here. See you then.